It was the dawn of the third age of podcasting, 30 years after the series had launched.
The Babylon Podcast was a dream given form. Its goal, to discuss the place where humans and aliens could work out their differences peacefully.
It's a port of call, home away from home for established fans, newbies, John, Blaine, and guests.
Humans and aliens wrapped in 2,500,000 tons of spinning metal, all alone in the night.
It can be a dangerous place.
Wait, what?
But it's our last, best hope for peace.
This is the story of the last of the Babylon stations.
The year is 2024.
The name of the podcast is
Babylon 5, 30 years later. Hello, and welcome to the latest episode of Babylon 5, 30 years later. The show where we discuss episodes of Babylon 5 30 years after they were originally broadcast, or released on home video, as the case may be. And we, as myself, Blaine Dowler, and my co-host, John M. Wilson. How you doing, John?
I am doing just fine, Blaine. It's so much that after our years and years of long friendship, I think we should stab each other to death.
That's certainly an option. And once you've made that offer, I cannot refuse without losing honor.
Right.
So I guess sadly this will be the last episode of our podcast.
And somebody's about to make a plane trip. Will they let you take swords on a plane? That's the question.
Yeah, we might have to visit a forge when one of us gets to the other person's country, because I don't see either security team letting us through.
No, probably not.
All right. In case you hadn't guessed, we are talking about Knives.
Ooh, Knives.
Yes, the episode that originally aired on May 17th, 1995. The final script written by Larry DiTillio, although he did not know it yet at the time. And the only episode of Babylon 5 directed by Stephen L. Posey. So prior to this, he had directed an isolated episode here and there of other TV series. So there's 6 prior to him. Young Riders, I think I've heard of before. But there's Island Sun, Grand Slam, Tour of Duty, DEA, Gabriel's Fire, Young Riders before. So really, Babylon 5 was the first one that feels notable to me.
Mm-hmm.
He would also do 2 episodes of Xena Warrior Princess, 1 Space Above and Beyond, 2 of Hercules The Legendary Journeys, a Dark Skies, a Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and 4 episodes of Star Trek Deep Space Nine.
They're all from season 7, though, so I would not recognize them by title. And he, it appears to be, no, they're not consecutive. So he didn't do an arc. He just did a random episodes. Extreme Measures is right towards the end of the season, December 23. So that's like the next to last episode or something. That last 10 episode arc that Deep Space Nine went out on, he had 2 or 3 maybe in that arc.
It would have been 2. Chimera was before that. I would have actually preferred it if Chimera did tie into the end, but it didn't. I don't know if you're familiar with that one, if you remember it by name.
I've seen it once.
Okay. This is the one where Odo meets one of the other foundling babies that was left behind.
Hmm.
And he was going to go leave and find the others, and I was always hoping that they would join the final conflict against the Dominion. But no. They didn't. All right. So, this episode only had 1 of the guest stars that they needed to cast, because the others were recurring characters. So the one they cast was Carmen Argenziano, who plays Urzo, Londo's old friend, who was named in an homage to Magic the Gathering. I am not familiar with Magic the Gathering, so I don't know what that homage is, but that's what Larry DiTillio said the name came from, so I will trust him.
Urza Jado and Magic the Gathering. I'm going to do some looking on that.
Okay. So I don't know. It may not be totally respectful, especially since Mr. Argenziano played the part well and passed away in 2019. But just looking at his IMDb photo, watching him in the episode, it feels like you cast him when you want Michael Ironside but can't afford Michael Ironside.
Okay, yeah, I can see that. Urza is the word from Magic. Not entirely sure exactly what it means, but it is it's a Magic the Gathering card.
Okay. Well, Urza is part of the story's A plot, although by screen time, the A and B plots are really close together. I'm only calling this the A-plot because Detilio does. And also, of the two plots, I found this one more interesting, but that's maybe tipping our hand for later discussion. So in this one, we actually start with Londo and Vir having debates about which Centauri opera composer is the best opera composer. When someone obscured by a dark cloak jumps out of the shadows and threatens Londo's life, cuts to the opening credits. When he come back, Londo realizes, oh no, this is his old friend just having fun with him. His old friend is at risk. There's been a motion taken to the Centauri Republic to have him cast out as a traitor and have his house destroyed. So Londo reaches out to Lord Rifa in support and is warned, oh, if you cast your lot with him, it will not go well for you. But Londo is willing to take that risk because he does not believe for a second the charges against his friend. So he joins his friend in a banquet and says, oh no, don't worry about that. I've got it taken care of. And he's saying, well, what do you mean? It's already over and done with. I've already lost the fight. And Londo's thinking, how is that possible? Rifa assured me. And once he drops the name Rifa, Urzo reacts very strongly because it turns out Rifa was behind this whole thing in the first place. So Urzo came to an old friend hoping for support and finds out his old friend is actually part of this evil element within the Centauri Republic who is pushing the entire Republic in what Urzo feels is the wrong direction. And he did not believe Londo would have been a part of it, but it turns out he is. And it's during these conversations that Londo learns things like the Prime Minister's death was not a suicide, as he had been led to believe. So audience members knew that. Londo found out in this episode. So Urzo challenges Londo in a fight to the death, and it's a duel with swords that Londo was never able to win. Urzo was always the superior with this blade, but Londo does win and take Urzo's life today because Urzo was fighting just hard enough to make Londo know he was serious, and it was a duel to the death, and he allowed himself to lose to Londo because that would protect the honor of his family. They would have to be taken into House Mollari. In the B-plot, Garibaldi talks to Sheridan about some weird things going on in Gray's sector. There's what they call the B5 triangle, where things disappear and whatnot. Sheridan is intrigued, so he goes down, finds a dead Marcab, who is apparently not completely dead because he jumps up and grabs Sheridan's face, and there's a little bit of a CGI effect to that as he makes contact. And then Sheridan is having hallucinations of very emotional moments in the past, things where he was afraid or dying, or in one case, just being welcomed home. And despite Franklin telling him to take some time off because there's nothing physically wrong with you, this is probably just stress from running the station and shifting from explorer to bureaucrat, take some time. But Sheridan realizes that no, there is an entity of some kind inhabiting his body who's trying to send a message, and he's trying to communicate. So he heads out to Sector 14 after learning about the Babylon 4 stuff from Garibaldi. So all that notes and everything were confiscated, but of course Garibaldi made copies because Garibaldi's Garibaldi. So Sheridan takes a flyer out. Garibaldi follows, and the alien that had possessed Sheridan jumps back through the temporal anomaly and releases Sheridan. It's still rough on Sheridan. He needs Garibaldi's help to grapple his Star Fury and bring him back. But they make it. It's all okay. And Franklin is just amazed by the possibilities of a life form like this that could have evaded all detection. And he's trying to figure out how it could be. And he's wondering if Sheridan's willing to make contact again so he can learn about this species. And Sheridan's response is a very hard no. This is over. So I think those are really the main points. I don't know if you had anything to add.
I didn't realize it was a temporal anomaly. It was just a big old glowy oval in space.
Yes, with a completely different star field that was moving differently before. They mentioned tachyons, and they figured it was the same anomaly that brought Babylon 4 through. That was the speculation in the dialogue before Sheridan got there.
They just said Sector 14, and he's like, I know, lucky me. They didn't actually say anything about Babylon 4, did they?
Yes, when Sheridan was in the batting cage, Garibaldi filled him in on, Babylon 4 came through, and Sheridan's going, how come I never heard about that? Oh, because EarthGov confiscated all our records, but here's copies.
Okay, so my ADHD brain sounds what I'm missing. I'm watching. I miss details. Okay, so
yeah. So in that conversation, Garibaldi says that EarthGov wanted it all locked out, and they had that sector forbidden from travel because they thought the anomaly that brought Babylon 4 through was still there.
Okay, so that temporal anomaly was what that alien energy thing was also from. Interesting.
Yes, and they mention tachyon particles, which science fiction has taken as a shorthand for things involving time.
Right. Tachyons and chronotons.
Yeah. So tachyons are not they are not taken seriously by any actual physicists anymore. They had been rejected before I even started my physics degrees in the 90s.
Mm-hmm.
And they were not as closely tied to time as others think. The idea of a tachyon was that with Einstein's theory of relativity, it takes infinite energy to accelerate something from speed of 0 to the speed of light. And then we have a discontinuity at the speed of light. It's a vertical asymptote. Nothing with mass can reach that speed, and everything without mass can travel only at that speed. But mathematically speaking, there are solutions that would allow things to be faster than light as long as they were faster than light at the point of creation, and then they could stay faster than light. And actually, it takes less energy. As they lose energy, they get faster instead of slower.
Because physics is weird.
Yeah, so they were proposed. Their masses would have to be complex or imaginary numbers, not real numbers. They have been rejected because, there's a lot of unfeasible things about them. You can't have complex structures and things like that. So they are no longer taken seriously by actual physicists, but because they would not only travel or accelerate as they go, but some of them would even travel backwards in time. They become associated with time travel in science fiction.
And it's not the first time that we've predicted the existence of particles based on the math. It's just having actually occasionally found things we predicted to find. We have all these other predictions that eventually we don't find.
Yeah. Plus, honestly, a lot of physicists will take a stab in the dark and predict something wild that supports the math, not actually believing it exists, but thinking, well, hey, if they do find it, then my name goes in the history books and people will hear about me 100 years from now.
Okay, I can buy that too. Fun opening note. So I have been watching Star Trek Deep Space Nine and Star Trek Voyager alongside this series. This episode aired right after the Deep Space Nine episode where Commander Sisko meets Captain Cassidy Yates for the first time. And they have their first date, and things are going sort of meh until he finds out that she and her, was it brother or cousin or somebody, play baseball. And in the Star Trek future, nobody plays baseball anymore. No one hardly knows what baseball is except for fans of ancient history. And here we open this episode later the same week, and they're playing baseball. I thought that was funny.
Yeah, that was in there. There were a couple of rewrites from the original script that Larry DiTillio talks about in the notes in the book. So a lot of this episode was working in things that the actors wanted to do. When Bruce Boxleitner wants to relax, he goes to a batting cage. So that was worked in. It was more like a video game CGI thing, and Straczynski said, that's too expensive. Let's just have Babylon 5 Park where they're showcasing Earth culture to the other aliens, and they chose baseball.
Mm-hmm.
Although, to me, that's a little bit of American bias. If I'm looking at the world as a whole, we'd have a soccer field. But
I think there probably is room in a 5-mile-long station for multiple game fields.
That's true, and we're also assuming that popularity of those sports does not wax or wane in the next 200 or so years.
Right, because in one future there is no baseball, and in the other future the captain plays baseball.
Yeah. So we have that. The second trip to the baseball or ballpark was supposed to be for archery. And they said, no, we already have this one digital set we're going to create. Let's just stick with the one. So yeah, the actual set there was Boxleitner and Garibaldi in front of green screens and basically the dirt around the batter's box.
Yeah, the green screening was pretty obvious. I thought it was funny that Garibaldi was just walking up already wearing stripy baseball clothes.
Yeah. And I do appreciate the little background dialogue that was put in where when they're having the conversation, the computers that are controlling the batting cage will say, okay, pitch being held. So they recognize that the batter's not ready. So that was just a nice subtle touch about the future.
Yeah, it was cool because the voice for that pitching robot machine was subdued enough that it didn't interfere with the scene, but also it was exactly the kind of responses you'd expect from a robotic computer pitching machine.
Yeah, it fleshed out the world without distracting.
Right.
Which is the right way to do something like this. The other part that got a major rewrite, there was going to be one other hallucination, and this time it would have been Sheridan on the bridge of not the Agamemnon, the ship he commanded during the war, instead the one before the Agamemnon, with Mira Furlan as a human for his first officer as they destroy the Black Star, and then cut to her back in her traditional full Minbari makeup, dressed as warrior cast, and Sheridan is the captain of the Black Stars. It's going down in full Minbari makeup, but that was cut because it would have been very expensive to create 2 sets, a lot more time in makeup, creating the makeup for Sheridan as a Minbari for script pages that even Detilio admits were not clearly trying to convey anything. He wasn't sure what he was trying to do. He just thought he was, looking back on it, figures he's probably just trying to work with Mira Furlan again because he thought she was a wonderful human being. So
that's good to hear. So let's talk energy aliens first, because I feel like you said this is probably the less interesting of the 2 plot lines. When you have something like, oh yeah, we call the gray sector the B5 triangle because lots of weird stuff happens down there, and we're just now mentioning it after having been on the station for 2 years, that feels artificial, especially in a show like this where those kinds of things tend to be, paced out along the way to give you a feeling of that actually being a problem. Mm-hmm. But it also feels like it was only done for this episode, that we're never going to come back to the B5 triangle gray sector again. Now we might. This might be setting up things for the future. This might be the beginning of seeds for future episode developments, but it was just, I don't know. It felt a little forced. And the captain's like, ooh, I like spooky stuff. I'll go explore. And found a dead alien possessed by an energy being that he was able to send home.
Yeah, that plot line, it actually felt very, it felt very Star Trek to me, maybe a season 2 TNG kind of Star Trek to me.
That's what my brain was going to finish your sentence with, was it felt Star Trek, but like in a lesser episode of Star Trek.
Yeah, I mean, first season of Deep Space Nine, we had a genetic memory thing implanted in Bashir of a criminal, but not a complete alien. Which is the fact that the alien is trying to get home, and the results the impact in communication is misinterpreted. It felt like Star Trek, or maybe the classic Outer Limits, because the original Outer Limits was, I found, really good at having adversaries that were not evil. They were, would be considered local heroes, but just with goals in opposition. I can't think of anything that was outright evil from the original run of the Outer Limits. In the 1990s reboot, yeah, it was in there. But the original, when I went back and rewatched it, I actually really enjoyed it, had a lot of respect for it. And that was one of the things I noticed. The whole run, I couldn't think of any villain who was outright evil. So this, to me, felt like, that plot line felt more like a Star Trek or an Outer Limits. Partly because they said, no, we are not going back. We're not going to communicate. Because, just reset to the previous status quo and moving on doesn't feel like B5.
Right.
B5 likes to have some sort of alteration to the status quo.
The character, at least one character from the storyline, is different coming out of the story than they were going in. And this didn't feel like that.
Yeah. Even if it's minor, like, the industrial goo that Franklin had the child treat as a gloppa egg or something in Believers. It was another Larry DiTillio episode. When you see Franklin's office, there's a decoration on the desk, so that experience meant something to him. He kept the memento. But this doesn't feel like that, whereas the Londo arc very much feels like this could have impact. I mean, Londo says, I need to start paying more attention to what's happening on Homeworld.
Yeah, the Londo story felt like one of those things that B5 is good at, taking something that is close and intimate and personal and giving it larger, macro plot ramifications. This is a reunion of friends that goes bad. But in so doing, like you said, Londo learns that things at home are not what he thought they were. He starts to have falling out with the person that he was working with before, in the politics, and that felt portentous.
It did. And actually, while we're talking about Riva, who Londo's working with, there was something that was actually noticed by Van Allen Plexico that I haven't noticed.
Okay.
He's been a guest on our show, as those might recall. I don't listen to other B5 podcasts until after we've recorded for that episode, because I don't want it to bias it. But in Riva's first appearance, Van Allen Plexico rightfully pointed out that he seems to be the only actor who has chosen to mimic the fake accent that Peter Jurasik came up with. So that is just a note for William Ford. He says, no, let's do it consistently. These two are supposed to be close. They're supposed to connect. Let's make him part of the same region and give him the same accent.
Okay.
So that did happen here. So that was an astute observation that I think is worth mentioning. But again, credit where credit is due. It wasn't my observation. It was Van Allen Plexico's. I
was amused that Centauri opera sounds a lot like Italian opera and even has some of the same runs that very famous Italian operas have had.
Yeah, well, again, that was one where DiTillio was indulging the actors in what they want to do, because then you tend to get better performances. And he learned that Stephen Furst is a huge opera fan. He was. We lost him early as well due to complications with his diabetes. And, Peter Jurasik loved the idea of the two of them singing opera in the halls as a bonding moment. So DiTillio promised to work that into one of his future scripts, and he managed to get it done. And Peter Jurasik had also mentioned to him that he never had the chance to have a really good sword fight, and that's something that he's wanted to do since his acting training. That came in here too, and might be related to why Stephen Posey wasn't invited back. So DiTillio says that, yeah, he brought this story and all the emotional beats to the screen very well, but he felt that it was lacking some energy in that sword fight.
Maybe. I don't know. I feel like that wasn't the most important part of the story. A fun sword fight is a fun sword fight, but it was also 90s TV. I didn't expect it to be like a really dramatic. I mean, Highlander is going on another channel at the same time, so I guess they're trying to live up to a standard. But
you know what? To Posey's credit, I didn't get the feeling that this was the high energy sword fight part. You see, they declare the start of the duel, cut away to the Sheridan story, and then a significant amount of time would have lapsed in the context of a sword fight. So when we cut back, they're both panting, they're exhausted, they've got visible wounds. Londo's got blood on his arm. So I felt there was enough energy there. It was conveying that these guys have been going at it for a long time. This is not 30 seconds in and done. So they are well matched, possibly because, Urza was fighting just hard enough to keep Londo at his limits so that Londo could win, but maybe did not properly estimate the current Londo.
So I want to talk about the other stuff earlier in the plot line with them, but while we're on the sword fight bit, it is the one there's a part of this storyline that I felt like missed a writing beat. And I don't usually have these particular kinds of complaints about a show, but at the beginning, and this is something I caught on the second watch. At the beginning of the sword fight, Londo is like, "Are you sure you need to do this?" And Urza says, "It's the only way." He's like, "I don't want to kill you." And then they have bravado about how you'll never kill me. Yes, it's hard. But that bit right there plays very nicely into the fact that Urza planned this as an out. And I feel that if you rewrote their dying conversation so that Londo isn't oblivious to Urza's plan at that point, because you have the conversation at the opening of the sword fight, and you have the conversation between Londo and Vir in the coda. I feel like Londo should have known what was going on during the sword fight. And I feel like the rest of the writing was there for it. It just gets botched by that last conversation with them.
Yeah, that could be. It would have been nice to have Londo clue in a little bit earlier.
Mm-hmm. He's helping his friend.
He is. And the arc he's on is about political machinations and understanding the wheels within wheels. And he says he's got to start paying more attention. And this is where he is taking that dark turn. He realizes, no, I am on a dark path, but I'm far enough down that path. I need to see it through to the end.
One of his lines is a little bit hard to follow at first. He says, for the first time, I'm starting to think some of my choices were wrong. And just in the context when he first says that, it sounds like he's talking about his choices with Urza. And then it goes on to talk about how he's, describing his choices he has made, in recent history regarding, Centauri and the Narn and everything. So it's interesting that he is starting to backpedal on what he has set in play. And we've had a whole season of this, and I'm not sure how long this Centauri Narn war is going to last, if it's a season arc or if it's a multiple season part of the story. But if it is a season arc, this is a very good time for Londo to start thinking, maybe not. So they can start working their way out of this war. Or it could just lead to more complicated things.
Yeah, it could be. I think that exact exchange is actually on the IMDb quotes page here. Londo, I have made many choices lately, Vir, and today, for the first time, I am not sure those choices were right.
Yeah, that particular line sounds like he's talking about his choices with Urza, but of course, he goes on to clarify that's not the case.
Yeah. Vir says that perhaps some good has come out of that strategy. It's not too late to make some new choices. So we still see Vir saying, let's turn this around.
Yeah, because Vir hasn't liked any of this the whole time. Vir has been against this whole war and everything with Morden and everything.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, this is the damning part, is when Londo responds with, no, the blood is already on my hands, right or wrong, I must follow the path to its end. And he just cuts off Vir's objection and says, I want to sleep if I can.
If I can.
So we're still getting that sense that there is a good person within Londo. It's just not the part that's in control right now.
Right. And the thing is, he's good at playing the other part. We've seen him play the other part in various facets as a public speaker, obfuscating the truth, working with the other nobles, and they're, toadying to him, making things happen and taking the credit for it. He's good at playing the role of imperialistic warmonger, but he doesn't like it as much as he thought he would. Or maybe it's just like he doesn't like the implications of it.
Mm-hmm.
But I did like bringing Urza in as a childhood friend of Londo. I felt like we the relationship between the two was portrayed very strongly. We see their love for each other, and feel it and understand it before they have a falling out. And so we're able to give that falling out some context at first, where it's an argument between friends before other things come out and it crosses a line.
Mm-hmm.
Like when Urza makes the outburst about what Centauri should be doing, it's like, oh, this is why his family has been labeled a traitor. He is loudly dissenting the governmental path. But his and Londo's friendship doesn't fracture at that point. It fractures later when he realizes how deep Londo is in the game.
Yeah, he is not supporting the Narn war. He was aware that the Emperor was going to denounce the war before his death. So, yeah, he says that in politics, information is key, and his is considerable.
Mm-hmm.
So that may be a lesson that Londo learns from this encounter. So,
and we talk about Adira, and that was sweet.
Mm-hmm.
Just a little memory there from the first season. But what else? We had drinking, we had opera, we had all the revelations with Centauri that Londo is just now finding out.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to think of any other salient points that came out of this storyline.
Yeah, we had some CGI creations that probably looked much better in 1990s standard definition TV resolution than they do remastered on Blu-ray.
With the space trip?
With the baseball diamond, with the Greylor that was stalking Sheridan in his quarters in one of his visions.
I thought the Greylor looked great. It just did not it did not line up with the rest of the scene. Like the lighting in the scene did not match the lighting, which is really the main problem with CGI in the 90s, is getting your textures and lighting on your computer generated stuff to match your realistic stuff. But I thought that was a great design for the creature.
Yeah, that's what I was referring to. It was rendered rather than ray traced, which is why you don't have lighting consistent with the room. So it's not like Jurassic Park where it's hard to tell by watching which scenes have CGI dinosaurs and which ones have robot dinosaurs.
Mm-hmm.
This one, every frame when it's on screen, Bruce Boxleitner was not looking at this thing.
Right.
He was imagining something there and reacting to something that was not visible.
Which makes sense because it wasn't there.
Mm-hmm. Which is one of the harder things about acting in science fiction. That's something Ewan McGregor said was the hardest part of the Star Wars prequels is in so many of his scenes, he was standing in a green or orange room interacting with a tennis ball.
Right. And now it seems like that's become more and more of the standard thing.
Mm-hmm.
I remember those conversations whenever the Star Wars prequels were being made, that interacting in a green screen room, acting there is not easy. And yet that has become such the standard, which is often the story with technologies developed for Star Wars films.
Yeah, Star Wars pushes technology hard. That's when I was doing film studies, I did a whole thing on how science fiction has driven so many film technologies.
Mm-hmm.
And that was part of it. It was the first on-screen optical stereo sound.
Mm-hmm.
The first on-film stereo was the 70mm print of 2001: A Space Odyssey. They had magnetic audio tracks, which could lead to distortion over time when when the film coils together. The first stereo of any kind was actually surround sound for Creature from the Black Lagoon. They shipped 5 records with the movie, 5 long-playing records, and you had to have 5 people in the theater drop the needle simultaneously when the projectionist gave the cue, and just hope the film didn't break. And that was also a totally new wave of 3D. But anyway, back to Babylon 5.
Yeah, I think I'm running out of points for the episode. It was, the Boxleitner, the Sheridan plot line was not great. It was there. It was fine. The Londo plot line, while not amazing, I thought was well done and did exactly what it needed to do. And it gave us a human interest story, along the way. So I enjoyed it.
Yeah. Oh, and actually thinking about, talk about the CGI, one other point. This was actually intended to air before In the Shadow of Zahadum. The CGI demands slowed down the production, but this was meant to be your introduction to how Anna died. You know that Anna Sheridan died, but the destruction of the Icarus was supposed to be seen here to set up what we learned in the Shadow of Zahadum.
Okay.
This was intended to inform the audience before that. I think we got enough in that episode that it wasn't really a miss.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, but yeah, other than that, I don't have anything else for the League in session. So, last best hope when we look for our standout character or character moment. What did you have in mind for that?
I think it's Londo, hands down. But I think even more so than Londo, I really connected with the character of Urza. His situation and his giving his all for the sake of his family, and realizing at the end that that's what he's doing, that all of this has been a little bit of bluster and a little bit of theater for the sake of saving his family's fate. And that was pretty impressive.
Yeah. And to me, I was torn between which Londo scene to pick. Part of it was one of the series contenders is that closing scene where he's talking about going to sleep if I can, and he's committed to the path. And the other one was that moment of realization when, after talking to Rifa, when he's saying, no, I need to pay more attention to what's going on Homeworld. Because, again, he thought the Prime Minister died by suicide. He didn't realize that was murder until Urza let him know. And, of course, the audience knew that it was murder orchestrated by Rifa. If we go back to that episode, I believe that was The Coming of Shadows. When Reefa's saying, yeah, there's some things I have to take care of on Homeworld. That's what he meant. The audience put that together when Londo asked for clarification, and Reefa just said, yeah, it's best you don't know.
Right.
So Londo should have been able to put the pieces together, but I'm willing to believe psychologically he didn't want to, so his subconscious wouldn't let him put those pieces together. And I thought, no, these would be two disconnected events, and I just don't know what Reefa was taking care of on Homeworld. It's easier for the audience to put it together because we know we're watching a TV show and there's no other possibilities for what Reefa's talking about. Plus, we saw the scene of the assailants coming after him. So we had more information than Londo. So it's not like it's out of character for Londo not to put it together. Right? He didn't want to believe it and didn't know as much as we did.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's the toss-up, but I think I am going to have to go with that final exchange where he's saying, no, I'm committed to this path, blood on my hands. I'm going to sleep now if I can.
Yeah.
Right, so shall we give some form to the dream and talk about which of this is relevant in the future?
Yeah, where are we going to go with that?
So for the Sheridan storyline, all that matters is that we have confirmation that temporal anomaly that brought B4 through is still there.
Mm-hmm.
Well, actually, that's not all we have. We've also established that sometimes things and people disappear in Gray Sector. And the events of this episode don't explain that, because they've been talking about that for a long time, and that Markab trader had only been on the station for 2 or 3 days after going through Sector 14. So there are things in Gray Sector that are going on that are odd and not yet explained. So yes, you're saying maybe these are seeds for the future. They actually are. Now the Londo storyline, yeah, so he is now learning through that conversation with Reefa, when Reefa said, you may no longer fit into our plans. I was actually reminded of the X-Files episode when Mr. X, Mulder's second informant, tells Mulder, you are my tool. I come to you when I need you. And it felt like both Londo and Reefa regarded the other as a pawn in their personal plans. And this is shifting that power dynamic and bringing more of Londo's attention to what's happening on the Homeworld. And we are going to see the results of that shift.
Alrighty. Yeah, Londo thought he was the man with the broom. And Reefa's the man with the broom.
Yeah. So yes, I think those are the main points for what's coming up in the future here.
Alrighty. Yeah, not a bad episode. Maybe more mundane in most respects, but it did some important things, and I was not bored.
Yeah, again, the Londo plotline worked really well. It's just the Sheridan plotline. Like you said, it's not bad. There's nothing really wrong with it aside from the fact that it doesn't feel like a B5 idea. It feels like a Star Trek or Outer Limits idea.
Mm-hmm.
And it just doesn't fit that well. It's the square peg in the round hole.
Right.
Now, next week is more decidedly B5. We have one more episode before the next extended break. So next week, it's Confessions and Lamentations.
All right. And that's going to give us our break. We'll have feedback and comics and novel and more comics. It's going to be great.
Yes. Especially that feedback. Now, we'd love to have the feedback episode, but we need feedback to make that happen. So we have multiple ways for you to provide that feedback. One of them is to just send us an email, Babylon5, 30 years later at gmail.com. You can use numerals or words for 5 and 30, as long as they're the right numerals and the words are spelled correctly.
You can also leave comments on the website where the show is posted. There are 2 of those. The first is johnreadscomics.com. There is no H in... Sorry. That's my version of the joke this time.
Okay. You can also leave comments at bureau42.com.
Or you can go over and leave a review at your favorite podcatcher. We check Apple Podcasts as a matter of course, but feel free to leave a review anywhere and just let us know if you'd like us to bring it up on the air.
And the last convenient place to leave comments is YouTube. So we do have our episodes automatically cross-posted to YouTube. You can leave a comment there, and we will be checking it. And note that if comments contain spoilers for future episodes, because we're trying to keep this spoiler-free for first-time viewers such as John, then that may be held for a future feedback episode when the content is no longer spoilery.
All right. And I think we're going to be sad next week because it's going to be Confessions and Lamentations.
Yes, we will see what happens. The show does like to surprise.
Yes, it'll be a party.
So yes, join us next week, and thank you for listening.
And good eating to you.